So I had this sweet introduction video that I'm going to be putting at the beginning of all of my streams now that I really wanted to show you guys tonight, but that's okay. We'll show it to you all tomorrow. Welcome to another College Football with Sam live show. Going to try and make this one a little bit shorter, but I do say that often and we still go over because we just love to talk college football on here. But I finally have a prediction for Oregon and Iowa. I finally was able to settle in and get myself comfortable to pick one of the Hawkeyes or the Ducks, so we'll get to that. That'll be out right after this stream is over. And also after the stream is over, we will get to the college football playoff rankings. I'll do a reaction for that after we're done as well. But on the agenda, a few more previews, some college football playoff predictions from myself, and then also looking at an early preview for Ohio State, Michigan, some talk about Indiana, and then last but not least, we will brush over the Big Ten and SEC slates. Make sure that you have liked the video, you've subscribed to the channel, that you've hit that notification bell. Our goal is to make you the most informed fan and the most enjoyable fan out there. We want you to have fun. We want you to know what we were talking about. Hi, Moody Meatball. Thank you for being a moderator and a consistent supporter and viewer of the channel. I appreciate you being on here, and I appreciate all of you who are live with me right now. I want to, though, lean into Oregon and Iowa. We'll start there. And I feel so filthy having to pick someone to win here. These are two teams that I think are undervalued by segments of the college football world, especially Iowa. These are two good stories, Iowa especially, but Oregon being this team that is quietly reloaded from last year, at least in theory. And like Ohio State has, Indiana has, there are probably some other teams that have too, but it like Oregon's not being talked about as much because they do have that one loss, and that's very fair. But someone has to win, someone has to lose, so that's my job on here, is to pick who's going to win and lose. The spread is currently at -6.5. It's been bouncing between 5.5 and 6.5 for the Ducks. The Iowa-Indiana spread from earlier in the year was bouncing anywhere between, I believe, Indiana -7.5, Indiana -8.5. So a little bit of a shorter line here. Both teams are coming off of a bye, and the forecast is going to be, does that say rain? Yeah, it's going to be 47 degrees and rainy, I guess, in Kinnick Stadium. This is like forecasting out a ways away. But yeah, that says rain, 47 degrees at kickoff. That is going to be really interesting for sure. That is, oh my goodness. Maybe I should have factored that into my prediction more. But ultimately, weather conditions really only help exaggerate an outcome. And the better team is usually going to win. Just take advantage of those factors and maximize what they already have on the table. But then there's another part of me that wonders, is this game really that hard to predict? Or are we all overthinking it? Are we overthinking Oregon, Iowa? Are we? Is it just me? Is it the entire college football public, the pundits? Are we making more of this game than we should? Are we ignoring things that go one way or the other? And that is kind of what pushed me in the direction that I am going here. The more I looked into this game, the more I thought about it, it just I got more conflicted. I got more tied into a pretzel. I'm kind of tied into a pretzel even right now. But um yeah, I think there's an obvious choice for who's going to win here. And it's counterintuitive, and I'm confused, and I'm in a pretzel about it. This game between 6th ranked Oregon and Iowa is, well, it's expected to be competitive, it's expected to be physical, it's expected to be close. I think that um I do think that there is a side here to be on that will end up being the right side when this game becomes history. There is a there are two choices here. Iowa and Oregon. And I think one of them is the proper choice. The more I investigated Oregon traveling to Iowa, the more I came away very impressed with both of these teams, thinking that they are evenly matched in a lot of different areas, but came away thinking that, one team is going to win. Iowa, Oregon. I'm talking myself in circles because honestly, this is going to be a close game, I think, and it's tough to pick. And I can see this game being a matchup where one side's controlling it for 3 quarters, maybe even 4, and then there's one turnover that completely decides the outcome. That's kind of how I see it, because both of these rushing attacks, incredible. Both of these passing attacks have tons of questions, and both defenses have faced Indiana and honestly had some pretty similar outcomes, honestly. Special teams is drastically different in favor of Iowa, and we'll talk about that. But I believe strongly there is one side here that is going to be right. There will be one side to Oregon battling Iowa that will age beautifully, and the other side will age like milk out in the sun on a paved road in Florida in the month of August. That's how I view this game. I made an early preview talking about Oregon, Iowa, what I think the key matchups are, my initial thoughts and what intuition was telling me. But the more I dive into this, Oregon ranked 6th, 7-1, 4-1 in the Big Ten. They're top 5 unanimously in all the metrics. Iowa's 6-2, 4-1 in the Big Ten. They should be ranked. They're 24th in the coaches poll. It's a travesty they're not ranked in the AP poll. They are top 20 unanimously in a lot of metrics, and some metrics and power ratings even have them inside of the top 15. This is a game that will be decided in the trenches, first and foremost. And if there is a tie, I'm going to come out and say that Iowa will win because they have the special teams advantage. They also have the home field advantage and probably the environment advantage. So if everything as it stands is equal, Iowa should come out on top. However, that's going to be challenging because the metrics, the talent, the depth, the completeness of the team says that Oregon should win. That's why they're favored by 6.5, even though they have to travel across multiple time zones. Iowa gets a bye. I know Oregon does too, but home team getting a bye is probably more advantageous than a road team getting a bye. Let's talk about the road team here. We have Oregon's schedule pulled up. They have had some struggles in protecting their quarterback, in passing the football. The Wisconsin game, the Indiana game were clinics on this. They had some moments of inconsistency against Northwestern and Penn State. I do not really frown upon them for the result of that Penn State game. I think Penn State was a top 10 team, not top 5, as many, including myself, thought they were preseason, but that they were top 10 preseason, and the Oregon game just broke them. And after that, they kind of quit. Things fell apart. Franklin got fired. I credit them with a top 10 win there. But the loss to Indiana and the win over Wisconsin did expose some things that are not inviting for high praise, for labeling this team as the nation's best team or an elite team. Where they struggled to protect their quarterback, Dante Moore showcased that his pocket awareness has a ways to go. And Oregon does not have many receiving options outside of Kenyon Sadiq and Brycen Moore. So if you are a complete and competent defense, you can sort of cover them well, lock down their options, and force much of their drastically inferior wide receivers and tight ends, as they have stars there, but they're not exceptionally deep, especially at wide receiver, to try to carry the load. And that doesn't work too well. The Indiana game was a perfect example of that. Indiana decided to focus on preventing Brycen Moore and Kenyon Sadiq from getting the football in space, or if they do, made sure they tackled well, made sure they minimized their impact, and they made sure to send plenty of sim pressures Dante Moore's way, and whether they actually brought a blitz, or they backed out of it, or they came from the opposite side that the O-line was sliding to protect, or the same side, they typically got to the quarterback and made Dante Moore think a little bit too much and take some sacks that he shouldn't have. And the Wisconsin game, it was a hurricane. Pass protection wasn't good. Wisconsin was able to run the ball in the first half, but Oregon, I think, showed who they truly are in terms of a quality of team and roster and physicality standpoint in the second half when they just bullied Wisconsin into submission. I take more away from the Indiana game than I do the Wisconsin game. Looking at the Hawkeyes' schedule, the home team, the loss to Iowa State hasn't aged beautifully, but I do not discredit them there because it was early in the year. I believe that Iowa has improved rapidly and markedly, particularly on defense, ever since that game. And it was a rivalry game on the road. So I don't take much away from that other than Iowa's not a top 10 team, because a top 10 team definitely goes into Jack Trice Stadium and wins. The Indiana game, 15-20 final score. Indiana had multiple opportunities to make that game uglier than it was, and maybe Indiana on a different day wins that by double digits. On another day, though, Iowa could have won that game outright, especially if Mark Gronowski stayed healthy for the entire game. And as for their wins, ever since that Rutgers and Indiana game, their secondary has tightened up. Wisconsin, they shut out. Minnesota, they held to 3. Penn State, 7 of that was from a special teams gaffe by Ferentz and the kicking unit. And the other points were mainly due to Penn State fielding a competent rushing offense, which we saw against Ohio State. When their coordinator was smart, they were able to kind of run the ball in Ohio State a little bit on the outside, because Penn State does have a good offensive line and good running backs. This is a team that loves taking away the football, making impact plays on special teams. They always tackle. Rarely do they miss them. They love to bring blitzes and send pressure. So I expect a lot of sim pressures from Phil Parker and that chess match between him and Will Stein, and how Will Stein responds to what Parker sends his and Dante Moore, Brycen Moore, Kenyon Sadiq, and that offensive line's way. This was really a tough game to make a pick on, but we all have to make picks on games. We can't just say that both teams will win, even though, in all honesty, that's what I do want to say here. I think that both of these teams are undervalued, underrated. Iowa has a real shot in this game, and if they beat Oregon, there's no reason why they can't win out, and a 10-2 Iowa gets in the playoffs with that close loss to Indiana and wins against Oregon, a likely ranked USC, Nebraska on the road, and at least they played a Power 4 opponent in the non-conference in Iowa State. As for Oregon, they have shown me at different points of the year that they can put their roster together and potentially win a national championship this year. So a lot's at stake in this game. If Iowa wins, their playoff hopes are alive. Oregon's are in jeopardy, and now they can't afford any more losses. And if Oregon wins, it probably says something about the caliber of team they have, because if they are a fraud in any way, shape, or form, they're not winning this game. Iowa, meanwhile, if the Hawkeyes here, if they truly beat, those other 6 teams, and then you combine that with their loss to Indiana, and say they only lost to Indiana by 7, which they did, but Indiana played at their best, and they still only lost by 7. I'm not really counting that safety. Then they should win this game. If Iowa at home can play Indiana in a back-and-forth competitive game where Indiana's passing offense is way more competent and complete than Oregon's, and I think their defense is better, then they should beat Oregon. So this was a really tough game to pick. And I've said that several times, but that's what makes it true. I'm expressing that this was a difficult decision to make, and we'll get to that here in a few minutes. For the Hawkeyes and Ducks, they are both top 10 in defensive points allowed per play. They're top 5 in ESPN's efficiency metrics on defense. You look at FEI ratings, Iowa has the 6th defense, Oregon has the 4th defense. The only teams ahead of them are Texas Tech, Ohio State, and Indiana, who per ESPN's efficiency metrics also have the top 3 defenses. This is a game in which both of these teams present very similar challenges to each other. Iowa has the superior special teams by a mile. Oregon has the superior passing attack by probably a mile. But both secondaries, I think, have an advantage over both wide receiver cores and probably both quarterbacks. Both D-lines have, I would say, advantages in pass rush. Especially, I would say, Iowa's against Oregon's pass protection. They have advantages there, especially when factoring in the quarterbacks. And I would say that both offensive lines have advantages over the defensive lines in run blocking, in the ground game. So there's a lot of similarities here. And how you pick a game where there are similarities, especially when the better team is on the road, so that you can't just go with, I'm going to pick the better team here. The inferior team in terms of quality is at home. And they get a bye, and their stadium is especially known for creating chaos and noise. And that can affect an offense. And the key to this game is Oregon's offense. If Oregon offensively is not capable of protecting the quarterback, and they're not capable of creating sustainable drives, then I don't care how good Oregon's defense is, Iowa's going to win. However, if they can protect the quarterback adequately and create X amount of sustainable drives, I don't know what X is. We're going to have to find that out on Saturday, solve for X. But whatever that number is, if they can hit that, no matter what Iowa does, I think offensively, then Oregon will win, because there is a limit to what Iowa can do offensively that Oregon does not have. I don't think there's really a limit to what any of these teams can do defensively. These are some of the best defenses in the country. For Oregon, pay attention to on offense, Dante Moore, and then the tackles, Isaiah World and Alex Harkey. How do they match up against some of Iowa's key players? Max Llewellyn, Aaron Graves, and Ethan Herkett on the defensive line. Look out for Deshaun Lee, TJ Hall, Cohen Entrinker, Xavier Nwapka, and Zach Lutmer. That is Iowa's secondary. How will they play against Decorian Moore, against Kenyon Sadiq, against Jeremiah McClellan, Gary Bryant Jr., Malik Benson? How do they face off? How does that battle for supremacy through the air look? And then for Oregon's defense, Bear Alexander, Amari Washington, and Mateo Uyunglele are going to have their hands full with Trevor Locke, Jennings Dunker, Bo Stevens, Logan Jones, and then Mark Gronowski, who's often involved in that power run game. So this is going to be a physical war. That is one thing that I know. That's one thing that I knew days before this prediction segment. So some keys to the game that I talked about in the early preview. We'll just go over these pretty quickly. This could feature the best lines of scrimmage in college football. So I don't see a team gaining a significant edge in this category. Minor edges, though, I think could turn this game ugly pretty quickly. If one side, because of how the defenses work and because Iowa's special teams will kind of even out Oregon's offensive advantage, because the field position battle will favor Iowa here, I would expect. And Iowa will have an easier time getting field goals and saying, hey, we can't get in the end zone, but at least we can kick 3. I don't know if I trust Oregon to kick 3. A slight edge on the lines of scrimmage here can really blow things out of proportion, because I think so much here is evenly matched that to have any advantage at all that factors in the majority of where your plays are made, which is offense versus defense. Special teams factors in for sure, but special teams is not an every down thing. You know, if it's a 3 and out, it's 1 out of every 4 downs, for example. And even then that depends, because if it's a 4th and 1, even inside your own territory, Dan Lanning might go for it. With Tim Lester as OC, maybe even Kirk Ferentz would do that if he feels it's appropriate, though I don't think he'd be as inclined to be as aggressive as Dan Lanning. That's another thing. Conservative versus aggressive. That goes to the game plan. Who utilizes the bye better? Who plays to their strengths better? These defenses are top 5. Whoever wins the turnover battle has a wonderful chance to win. Just so much is being made about this game, and appropriately so. And yet, I think that one decision could turn this game from a 1-score victory for Team B into a 2-score victory for Team A. One decision, one play. And I think that segues perfectly into my prediction. So all good things must come to an end, praising both of these teams. I'm going to have to pick one over the other. I believe that Iowa's pass defense and Oregon's pass offense will be a war. Oregon will probably get a chunk play here or there, given the nature of Phil Parker loving to send pressure, and Dante Moore and DeCorian Moore and Kenyon Sadiq having that, trifecta where you would love to have Evan Stewart back, because then you have 4 players who are connected and can make impact plays, and that makes it exponentially harder for the defense. But at least you have some playmakers to get open. But I also think Iowa's a really good chance of probably having an interception here or getting some type of pressure. And, yeah, it's going to be difficult for either side there to get a lot of ground. That's pretty evenly matched. I think it's the same thing with both lines of scrimmage to a degree, and I'll get into this more when I reveal who I'm picking to win. The rush defense, rush offenses, I think that they will be pretty balanced. I do think that one side here probably has a 55 to 45 advantage, and that helped me make my prediction. As for Oregon, I think they have a slight staff advantage, but it's not all that big. It can easily be mitigated by some of the matchup edges that Iowa has. They have better special teams staff. They're playing host. Iowa is the inferior team here, but given the circumstance and some of the matchups, that didn't really factor into my prediction more than it already has, in the sense of Oregon being the favorite. Like, I don't think that Oregon is 3 touchdowns better than Iowa, for example. I don't think that. And then for the Oregon pass defense versus the Iowa pass offense, that's obviously something that goes Oregon's way. But Iowa has been willing and able to run Gronowski 10 plus times. And I think this might be a game where they do that. And if that happens, then they don't need to win in the passing department all that much if their defense and special teams does their job. I'm going to go with a pick that I think is pretty controversial for the college football media, for the public. This isn't even me being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. After looking it over and thinking about it, I genuinely feel this way. I think a little bit too much is being made up of this game. And what I mean by that is Iowa's a really good team who I think will play Oregon well here. And they'll show out and they will give a great effort. and it will be enough to win. The problem is there's an if clause with what Iowa can do here, and there is not an if clause with Oregon. If Oregon and Iowa both play to their ceiling, we know what happens. Oregon probably wins by double digits or maybe even like a lot more than that. If both teams play to their floor, I would say Iowa probably wins being the host and having that special teams edge. I'm not going to pick either team to play 100% or 0%, but I think off the bye, with Moore being healthy and Oregon's offensive staff being able to look at some things and reassess where they're at, and also the idea that there is one team in the Big Ten who I think from an offensive line perspective could have a more effective ground attack than what Indiana has. Iowa was able to control that pretty well. That's Oregon. I believe that Oregon's rushing attack at its peak is probably the best in the Big Ten. I know that USC's up there too for sure. I think USC has somewhat to do with scheme in their backs, though. We've seen their rushing offense. It's still really good, but I think what Oregon offers currently is better than what USC offers currently. If Waymon Jordan were healthy, that might be a different story. I think that Oregon has the 55-45 edge in the trenches, and I think as the game goes on, that is going to be more evident, and it will just be hard for Iowa to catch up to that. So I'm picking Oregon to win by 7 to 10 points here. I think it'll be close, but at the end of the day, Oregon's the better team. I think Oregon has enough offensively to nullify the special teams advantage. And Indiana, I rewatched parts of that game today to get a better idea of Iowa. I think on a different day, there's a very good chance that Indiana is able to run the ball on those fourth down conversions and get it, and the game is already out of hand in the fourth quarter. So I think that Oregon, who in theory should be a little bit better in those situations just due to the size on the O-line and the fact that I think they're better at tight end than Indiana and maybe deeper on the offensive line, though it's close. It's just basically me saying I think that Oregon with the bye will be able to do enough, and with their talent to where you combine everything, and I'm picking Oregon to win and ultimately to cover as well. Looking at the Big Ten standings, Iowa only has one conference loss. So if they win here, they'll be ahead of Oregon in conference standings. I think if they win this game, they're probably going to win out. Because if they can beat this Oregon team, who I have a lot of respect for, they'll probably be able to beat USC, who I think they have some favorable matchups with. And they should beat Michigan State at home and Nebraska on the road. If Iowa wins, there's a very realistic chance that they're in the playoffs. In fact, I think it's likely if they're 10-2. Also, if they're 10-2, there is a chance they get to Indy. If they are, say, they're 10-2, Michigan's 10-2, and like by that they beat Ohio State. You have Ohio State, Michigan, and Iowa all with an 8-1 record. Iowa's played Oregon, USC, and Indiana. They've played a lot of teams that will have 7 or more Big Ten wins, like 2 of them, which Ohio State and Michigan have not faced. And then they'll also have faced USC. They'll have faced Minnesota. They'll have faced, who else have they faced? Well, Nebraska, who has a few. There's a good chance that Iowa could actually have that tiebreaker advantage in that 3-way tie scenario and advance to play Indiana if they win out in Indianapolis, which would be insane. Oregon wins here. I think there's also a really good chance they win out, and we're talking about the same thing. They have an outside shot to Indy. The winner of this game, I think, goes to the college football playoff, and there's a good chance they could also go to Indianapolis, pending on the Michigan-Ohio State game. I hate it. In my gut, I feel like I feel like I said Ohio State. I feel like Iowa is going to win here, but my brain and looking at how Oregon has played versus how Iowa has played informs me that I believe it's very hard if you are a limited team to beat a team the caliber of Oregon. So I don't think Oregon's overvalued as some do. I also think Iowa's undervalued, which a lot don't. And I think it's a travesty Iowa isn't ranked. But I do not think that they will beat Oregon here. I think they're a little bit too limited offensively. They just don't quite have the horses that I would want them to. And it also has to do with Oregon's defense. If last year's Oregon run defense were here, I would sell everything and hit the invest button on Iowa. But I think this Oregon rush defense and defense overall is much improved and different from last year's, and that's a big difference when you're playing this type of Iowa team. Okay, that took a while. It took like 30 minutes, but I think that was worth it. Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. It's really tough, man. But you got to make a pick. Let me see. Just reading some texts that I got, making sure there's no emergencies. But thankfully, there are no emergencies. We can move on to Georgia versus Mississippi State. The 5th-ranked Georgia Bulldogs travel to Starkville to play the Mississippi State. God, should I seriously forget the mascot for Mississippi State? Oh, it is the Bulldogs. Yeah, it's Bulldogs versus Bulldogs. The 5th-ranked Georgia Bulldogs travel to Starkville, Mississippi to play the Mississippi State Bulldogs, who are coming off their first SEC win since 2023 in a close, I believe it was 38-35 win over Arkansas. Mississippi State just needs one more win to go bowling. They're 5-4, 1-4 in the SEC. Georgia is 7-1, 5-1 in the SEC, and they're only favored by 7.5 points. This game will be broadcast at noon Eastern time on ESPN. Looking at Georgia's schedule here, they have been in close games throughout the entire year. Tennessee, overtime win. Alabama, lost in the fourth quarter. Auburn, it was a close game for 4 quarters. Stockton just had a really late touchdown to make it 20-10. Ole Miss pulled away in the fourth quarter after being down by 9 at the end of the third. Florida pulled away in the fourth quarter after Florida had a chance to convert a 4th and 1, at which point they'd probably, make it a 27-17 game, but they come up clutch on defense. This team has played in really 5 close games, and they're 4-1 in those games. Usually, that is the mark of good coaching, but sometimes it can be the mark of luck. And while I believe that for Georgia it's more the former than the latter, even for good coached teams, well-coached teams, when they play in this many one-score games, usually at some point the luck runs dry. And eventually they either lose big or they finally lose in a one-score game. And with where this spot is for Georgia, where they have to play Texas at night next week, it's a big game. That is if you lose, you're not out of the playoffs, but you'll be out of Atlanta. You will not win the SEC if you lose that game, given how Alabama and A&M are winning. It's a big program game, I think, given how Georgia just isn't who they were in 21 or 22 or even 23, and you just need all the wins you can get, I think, if you're Georgia. You need to build momentum, not just for the playoffs, but for next year. And you need to win. You need to keep on winning. So this spot is really weird and tough for Georgia. For Mississippi State, they play Missouri after this game. Then they get a bye before Ole Miss. So this is a tough final 3-game stretch. Georgia at home, Missouri on the road, bye, and then Ole Miss at home. They can win one of these games. In fact, given how many close games they've played in, so close loss to Tennessee, close loss to Florida, close loss to Texas, they are 1-3 in one-score games, or 2-3 because they did beat Arizona State earlier in the year. Ole Miss has played in close games. Missouri has. Georgia has. They could beat 2 of these teams, which would be a really impressive feat by Jeff Lebby. This Mississippi State team is much stronger than last year's team. They're not a good team, but an average team. I would say so. And their offense is well schemed. It's planned. It's well coached. I think they can catch one or two of these teams by storm. And Georgia's defense has struggled this year. So maybe this is the game that's ripe for the picking, where Mississippi State can upset a top 10, top 5 team, a ranked team. They'll have the opportunity to do that at least in two of these games, because Ole Miss will certainly be ranked when they play them. I don't know quite about Missouri, but if they beat A&M, certainly they'll be ranked, and maybe they'll be a 3-loss ranked SEC team. Who knows? I think that the key here for Mississippi State is that they can find a way to slow down the run. And that is going to be tough against a Georgia offense that is one of the best in America in general, but mostly due to their punishing ground game, which they did not have last year. It was putrid. Their rushing attack in 2023, in theory, on paper, was great, but in practice, I think when you needed it, so against Alabama and some other games in the regular season, it didn't really show up all that much. And then, yeah, this is their best rushing attack since 2022-2021 for Georgia. Their offensive line is better. Their quarterback in Gunnar Stockton is a fit, and he helps the rushing attack because he is a dual-threat quarterback. If you're Mississippi State, you need to slow down this rushing attack. Otherwise, you have absolutely no chance here. Now, you should be able to engage in a shootout because of what your passing attack can do. And Georgia is not good at stopping the pass. They look slow at secondary. They look like they maybe made some misevaluations. They've been very shaky at defensive back, to say the least. This is probably their worst pass defense under Kirby Smart, except for 2016. For the Bulldogs, Georgia Bulldogs, Gunnar Stockton, Zachariah Branch, and Drew Bobo are the players to pay attention to offensively, and then Christian Miller, C.J. Allen, and K.J. Bolden are the players to pay attention to on defense. For Mississippi State, I think it's all about Blake Shapen, Devon Booth, Brennan Thompson, Isaac Smith, Kelly Jones, and Jivian Williams. Smith, Jones, and Williams are on the defensive side, specifically in the secondary. Shapen is their quarterback, and Brennan Thompson is their top wide receiver. Be paying attention to those players because, especially for Mississippi State's offense, if they get going, they'll get going. And I do not have much confidence in this Georgia defense to put up a valiant effort against really any offense at this point. Like Kentucky, of course, it's Kentucky. Auburn, of course, it's Auburn. But if you can pass the football, Tennessee, Alabama, Ole Miss, even Florida to a degree, we have proof of concept that if you can pass the football on Georgia. I think that a lot of things still go Georgia's way here. Their run defense and offense, they should control the trenches. They have the better team and staff, and they should be able to get some wins in the pass defense and some wins in the passing offense. So with that being said, I am picking Georgia to win, but Mississippi State to cover. Maybe it's a late cover, or maybe it's a, it's a cover straight up, and Georgia's just able to have another one-score win. But I trust Georgia here to at least get out with a win. Wouldn't be shocked doing kind of a double take on the trench advantage that Georgia has in practice and in theory if Georgia gets one of their bigger wins in terms of margin of victory over the entire season. And that would be big leading into a game against Texas where Texas is a bye. Texas is getting hot in certain areas, and you're going to need to be at your best if you want to beat that Longhorn team. For the standings, Mississippi State earning a win here gets them to bowl eligibility, which is a huge win for Jeff Lebby in that program. For Georgia, a win here keeps them in the SEC championship game race because of their schedule, especially if A&M loses. You best believe they'll probably get to Atlanta over Texas A&M. You best believe that. And then that's especially because, say, Georgia beats Texas if they win out, because if they lose one more SEC game, they're not going to Atlanta. Say they beat Texas and Texas beats A&M. Then you have the common opponent tiebreaker, which goes Georgia's way on top of their stronger SEC conference schedule. At least from what I understand for the conference schedule. I haven't calculated that out, but I know the common opponents tiebreaker exists, and that would go Georgia's way in that scenario. So they're hanging around trying to get to the SEC championship game. If not, a win here would make their likely appearance in the college football playoff all that much more firm. But I think that Georgia wins. Mississippi State covers, but it's not a strong lean here. If I'm wrong about this specific prediction, it will be Georgia wins and they win by a lot. Now we can get on to some other previews, few in the Big Ten specifically. What do you guys think about the college football playoff rankings, for example? What do you think about them? Yeah, let me know in the chat, because I imagine while we are live, they will at some point come up. Northwestern, off a bye, travels to the 20th ranked USC Trojans. This is a Friday night game, which are some of my favorites, 9 p.m. Eastern time on Fox. USC's favored by 14.5 points. They have to make the trip across the country. Thankfully, they have a bye, and USC's coming home after a physical, tough game on the road against the Nebraska Cornhuskers. So, what's Northwestern's path here? That's really where you have to start, because when you're a 14.5 point underdog, you're clearly not the better team, especially this late in the year, barring something crazy happening. What do you need to do? Well, I can tell you that Northwestern's been in this position before. Playing Penn State on the road as a 3-touchdown underdog, they win 22-21. They beat UCLA at home after UCLA fired Foster, so that was when they were a different team under Skipper and still are. They were able to find a way to beat them. They shut out Purdue 19-0, and they made it interesting against Nebraska. Only a 7.5, 8.5 point dog there, depending on where you looked. Some was even 6.5, but they made it 21-21 at one point and had an interception in Nebraska territory. So this team has been in competitive spots. They've made games competitive. They fight. They're well coached under David Braun. And while this is their second road game in a row, at least they have that bye sandwiched in between there. And I believe this staff is good enough to take advantage of that rest time to potentially pull off what would be a massive upset win here. They also could beat Michigan, Minnesota, or Illinois. They can beat, I think, any of these four teams. They won't beat all of them, but they could beat certainly two of them to finish 7-5. Maybe there's even a world where they beat three of them and finish 8-4. Regardless, I think they do upset one of these teams to finish 6-6. The odds would currently say that team is likely to be Minnesota from a power ratings angle. For the Trojans, USC has not suffered much anxiety when playing at home, beating Michigan 31-13, Michigan State 45-31, Georgia Southern 59-20, and Missouri State 73-13. They, in the month of November, get to finish out with 3 out of their 4 remaining games at home. Northwestern, Iowa, and UCLA, with that trip out to Oregon clearly being circled. This is a must-win. If you lose here, you're out of the playoffs, and there's a good chance you could lose out if you lose to this Northwestern team at home. So, Lincoln Riley and USC, they beat Nebraska, but they need to make sure to rally the troops quickly, make sure they're healthy and that they're well prepared for this Northwestern team, especially since it's one less day of rest and preparation compared to a normal week, and your opponent has a bye on top of that. Looking at the matchup here for the Wildcats and the Trojans, I think that Caleb Komolafe and Martez Lewis and Caleb Tiernan and that offensive line should be able to get some yards and some churn and movement on the ground. I actually like their rushing offense from a consistency angle against this USC rushing defense, which after the really past 3 games, I've begun to view in a different way. I know that in theory they did well against Michigan on the ground, yeah, but that was in part due to Justice Haynes exiting the game, and Jordan Marshall hadn't really hit his stride yet. Did well overall in that game, not discrediting them there, but they didn't completely whip Michigan a D-line to O-line. They won at times, and that combined with beating them through the air in defense and then destroying them offensively really put Michigan in a hole they couldn't get out of. So I think Northwestern, if they can stay within striking distance, should be able to run the ball pretty effectively. USC, though, clearly has the advantages elsewhere. I mean, Northwestern's secondary and defense has gotten more banged up and injured as the season's gone on. Hopefully they've been able to recover and rest and get some guys back over this bye. But USC, as limited as they are in terms of depth at the receiver positions, and Notre Dame and Nebraska were able to exploit that, USC at home is a different team from where they are on the road, and they're not facing Nebraska's secondary or even Notre Dame's. Notre Dame's I don't think is great, but at least they have Leonard Moore, and it was on the road in the rain. It's not going to be the case here. You're going to be at home playing a defense that isn't as talented. You should be able to run the ball pretty effectively. I love USC here to win and to cover. This game reminds me a lot of USC Rutgers last year. Rutgers was coming out, had a run offense edge in theory in terms of against USC's run defense, but things just got out of hand, and even though they made it interesting there in the third quarter, fourth quarter, USC pulled away, won that game by I think 3 scores. Similar to this season's earlier game between USC and Michigan State, I would also say. So the Trojans here are going to win. They are going to cover. For Northwestern and USC, this game is really just impacting their pride. For USC, it's more than that. They're still in the playoff race. But for Northwestern, you're out of the playoff race. You're fighting for pride to secure David Braun's future and your program's future. For USC, it's similar. Because if they lose this game, I'm telling you, there's a good chance they'll lose to Iowa. There's a good chance that they'll lose to UCLA, and you are getting destroyed by Oregon if you cannot beat this Northwestern team. A loss here would take all the oxygen out of the program. It'd be like someone stabbing you like right in your gut with a big sword, not just a knife. And even a close win here would be concerning for USC. But I do think they win and cover. And this late in the year, especially when you're as thin of a team USC is, and you're dealing with some injuries, a win is a win. So USC would expect them to win and cover. Ohio State traveling to Purdue. Is this going to be a redo of 2018? I smell 2018. No, I'm just kidding. We no longer have Urban Meyer at Ohio State. Jeff Brom's at Louisville. Rondale Moore isn't at Purdue. Ohio State's Ohio State. You get the point. In a matchup that has been played actually several times since that 2018 game. So in 2021, it was played in Ohio Stadium, and Ohio State won big. It was played at Purdue in 2023. And then Ohio State hosted Purdue last year, and now they're playing Purdue again. These teams have actually played 4 times in the past 5 seasons, including this season. That's one of the more common matchups from the old Big Ten West and Big Ten East in the 2020s. That's for sure. But first-ranked Ohio State, undefeated both against the spread and in what matters, the wins and losses. Travel as 29.5-point favorites to Purdue, who's 2-7, 0-6, nearly upset Michigan. That was a really bad effort by the Michigan Wolverines. They look like a bad football team, but they just couldn't get it done. Even with the turnover advantage, even though they brought it in a way that I don't think the Michigan staff or players did, it could not earn a win. For Ohio State, it's quite simple. This is the best team in America. There are others who can compete with that, who can contend with that. I've been on record saying that I think like Indiana, Alabama, Oregon can contend with that, and Ohio State's not the clear, absolute number one, but I think they're number one right now. They're ranked number one in the polls. They're the favorite to win it all. I'm actually, outside of picking them to go 12-0 in the regular season, you'll see in my college football playoff bracket, I have them winning it all right now. I keep flipping between a variety of teams because I think it's that close at the top. But this week, I have Ohio State winning it all because I picked because I picked Oregon to beat Iowa. If I picked Iowa to beat Oregon, it actually would have been different, which I think shows how important that game is. This game's important for Ohio State because you don't want to take a loss at all. A loss to any of these teams outside of maybe Michigan at the end of the year would impact your chances at getting the bye, for sure. And a loss to Michigan would really not totally sour what the team has done, but Michigan at this point on the schedule is going to be their toughest test due to how Penn State has been trash and Texas has just not been the team people thought they were preseason. That is the game of the year. It always is in the regular season for Michigan and Ohio State. It's a little bit emphasized because the strength of schedule for Michigan and Ohio State are much weaker in the regular season this year than they were last year. And also Michigan's better than they were last year. So Ohio State right here is just trying to survive. Like, win, hopefully win dominantly. You probably will if we're being honest, and get on out of here and prepare for bigger and brighter things. For Purdue, it's just been a tragedy of competitive losses, some blowout losses. I believe they're going in the right direction under Barry Odom, but I don't think they're going to win a Big Ten game for the rest of the year. I mean, their best chance, honestly, was Rutgers or Northwestern or Minnesota. They blew those. Michigan, no, that was a really good chance, but again, they couldn't get it done. Between Ohio State and Indiana, you'll probably lose by a combined 100 points or something close. And Washington, you're not catching them at the right time. It's on the road, and it's not before they play Oregon, so there's not really a hope of a trap game. Obviously, picking Ohio State to win, picking them to cover here, I don't think there's much of a point going over the roster matchups. The one thing I'm curious about here for Ohio State is, can they find rushing offense against Purdue? They have struggled to find that throughout the entire season. It is a rushing offense that I think is a little bit inflated by playing Grambling and Ohio, and by being up by so much against your opponents that you've mentally broken them, and then you can hand it off and have some success there. That's kind of what I think about this rushing offense, that the only reason it's averaging above 4 yards per carry is because of the strength of schedule in the non-con outside of Texas, because Grambling really is that bad. Ohio's a MAC team. And also the sheer talent edge you've had over everyone you've played outside of Texas, where as the game goes on, you'll just naturally wear down those defenses. Case in point, like every game they've played in, even Penn State. Penn State's defense is pretty bad, which is shocking to me. It's probably even shocking to the Ohio State people who accurately predicted that Knowles wouldn't work out at Penn State. Although I think that was more of a Franklin thing, but they were right. That defense is bad, and it's worse than I think anyone expected it to be. It's outside the top 50. It is a worse defense in efficiency metrics than Ohio State's in 2021, which I think goes to show that was more of a Franklin thing than a Knowles thing, but that's for probably a different time, different video. Ohio State will win big here. They'll cover. I'm also curious as to whether or not Purdue can find any offense. This is another game where Ohio State should be able to shut out Purdue. If they don't, it's not really a big deal. It's really hard to shut out people. I'm more interested to see if Purdue scores. Can they create any sustainable drives? Can they hit that double-digit range? Allowing one touchdown is no big deal. Like, even the best defenses in history did that on an average over several games. It's just that hard to keep opponents out of the end zone for 60 minutes. I'm curious to see if some of what Purdue has done against Minnesota, against Michigan, for example, even against Notre Dame, if any of that can translate over here and maybe they can go on some long drives. Curious. But I don't really think that'll happen. I think the final score will probably be something like Ohio State 42, Purdue 7, or Ohio State 42, Purdue 3, or 42 or 38 to nothing is kind of what I'm thinking here. So I'm picking the Buckeyes to win and cover. Okay, last quick preview. The last of them. Ohio State is the clear team to beat. They're the reigning champion, giving up 6.9 points per game. Their defense is crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But I can understand why you'd think they're the clear team to beat. I get that. I get flack for saying they're not, but I have them at number 1, but to me, well, okay. If by team to beat you just mean number 1, I agree. If by team to beat, and I think you emphasize that with clear team to beat, you mean they're in a tier above. No, I don't agree with that. I think that Indiana has shown me more just from a football angle. Ohio State, in theory, has more to do a priors angle, but from a pure football angle, Indiana's shown me more. And then, like, Oregon hasn't. But if you go down south, and I will catch flack for this, but take a look at Alabama and what they've done with their schedule after the Florida State game. They're not right now, but they could be. They could be that team. I think that the top is very compressed. That's what I think. I mean, maybe I'm wrong there, but I believe that there's multiple teams fighting for it all. It's not just Ohio State, and if anyone has a chance against them. I don't think that way. And I think if you watch like how they play, you'll understand that in comparison to how other teams play. So they slow it down a ton, but Indiana does too. Not to the same degree, but they do. And then, Indiana runs more plays, and I'm actually going to do research on this and maybe even a video on it. Intuitively, based on watching especially how the quarterback positions operated, I feel like the extra snaps Indiana has compared to Ohio State almost exclusively goes to their backups. Could be wrong there. So I think they're number 1. I have them winning it all, as you'll see later in this live show in this segment. But I do not think that they're the obvious number 1. They're not 2021 Georgia. They're not that number 1 team where you look and you say, holy cow, someone's going to be lucky to beat them. And Alabama was that team. They're not that. I don't even think they're 2024 Ohio State. I think 2024 Ohio State, the reason they were not better in terms of like certain things is because they played a much tougher regular season schedule than this team did. Like 2024 Oregon is better than any team Ohio State's played so far. Same with 2024 Penn State. And 2024 Indiana probably them too, because Texas early on, as we've come to understand, was very broken offensively. They were basically Iowa. I think wait, hold on. Let me look at that. Okay, but you have to remember, part of those plays is because Indiana's played an extra game. But let me fact check this live. It's a live fact checking. Then we'll get to more things. 247. So that would be, let me see. That'd be 632 for Indiana. 632 plays. And Ohio State has ran 492. So yeah, there is a disparity there, but you got to take away 60 plays from Indiana. You basically gave Indiana an extra game there for the snaps. Again, that was just an intuitive comment about the backups, but in almost all of Indiana's games outside of Iowa and Oregon, they have put in backups in the fourth quarter for like the entire fourth quarter. I'll have to look at the snap counts though. Ohio State is playing a game where they're going to be fresher than everyone else, and the schedule will certainly help with that too. Certainly, I would say right now, based on watching them, they're the freshest team in college football because how they play looks pretty. Everything looks effortless outside of the run, outside of the rushing attack. Everything looks effortless. Special teams and rushing, they're trying as hard as they can to not do very well. Everything else, it's completely like casual. Like they're not even operating at. It's not they're not operating at peak efficiency. They probably are. I would imagine in the playoffs they continue with the slow pace of play too, because that's what happened last year outside of parts of the Tennessee and Oregon game. Like against Texas and Notre Dame, they did slow it down a little bit more. For Washington, Wisconsin, let's get to that. Washington travels after a bye to Wisconsin, who's also coming off a bye. The Huskies are only favored by 11.5 points here over a Badgers team that is 2-6, 0-5, that is on quit watch. But they have not quit yet. So what do we make of this game? Well, what I make of it is that every game for Washington from here on out, outside of maybe Purdue at home, due to their style of play, due to the spot they're playing in, is either a trap game or it is the Oregon game, which is their biggest game of the year. I mean, Ohio State maybe was, but Oregon's a rivalry game. So I would put that a tier above. What do I think about this? I think that for Washington, it is very imperative that they start fast. I think with the defense Wisconsin has and the spot they are in, and also who Washington is, that if you start, say, like you did in the Maryland game, there's not a really good chance you're going to make that, 24-0 run to come back and win 24-20. Don't think there's a great chance of that. I don't think you can afford to start slow in the same way you did with Rutgers at home for that first half. And then for Michigan on the road, you can't throw 3 interceptions in this game. You won't lose by 17 like you did to Michigan, but you very well could lose. There's a reason this line is 11.5 and it's not 21.5. Again, Washington should win. That's for sure. But there are some things to pay attention to here, and I don't think Wisconsin, especially against a Washington team like this, is going to be totally lifeless. I mean, they were able to compete with Michigan for a half. They were able to show they didn't quit against Oregon. Outside of that, it's been pretty pedestrian, that's for sure. But I don't know. It's kind of a weird spot. They haven't fired Fickle yet. The team hasn't quit on him yet. And I think it's very likely they'll lose out. And if they don't, they're probably only getting, an additional win to their already 2. This is a tricky spot for Washington, having to travel out here. I know they're coming off a bye, but Wisconsin is too. They do have several roster edges, though. I think they have the better QB, obviously, with DeMond Williams Jr. Their receivers are better. Their offensive line, as bad as it's been at times, is better than Wisconsin's. The difference for me is on defense. That's the difference for me, specifically the defensive front. Washington's done a good job stopping the run and being disciplined there and forcing you to beat them through the air. But Wisconsin is a different animal where they were able to get pressure, a lot of pressure, against Ohio State and Oregon's offensive lines. Sayin evaded the pressure. Dante Moore did not. They have a legit defensive front with Sebastian Cheeks, Ben Barton, Javier Suggs, Daryl Peterson, Mason Reiger, Parker Peterson, Brandon Lane, Tyrese Fearby, then Tackett Curtis, Christian Allegro. They run a 4-2-5, 3-4, 3-3-5 defense. It's a very interesting defense that Tressel runs. They can really go multiple with it because of what they did in the portal, bring in a lot of additions, especially on the D line, and how all of them have panned out. They have a really deep defensive line, and I worry about Washington's offensive line going up against that unit. But they have the better overall team, and they can actually put points on the board. So I do expect Wisconsin to cover and actually make it interesting, but I do believe Washington will escape with a win. If not, they won't escape, but they'll just win by 10, and it'll be uncomfortable, but a win is a win here, especially when you're traveling across the country. I think as long as Washington wins here, given the spot, there's not much to worry about. And I'm picking them to win and cover against a Badgers team that wants to show life, that does show fight, especially on defense, but just does not have the roster to win games with this schedule. It's been very rough for the Badgers, and as I have mentioned in every Wisconsin video, I think they need to part ways with Fickle at the end of the year, and athletic director Chris McIntosh. Those are your previews. Oh, they're done. They are done. But now let's get on to my college football playoff bracket, my Week 11 one, and then we can get into some other topics and get out of here. I'm starving. I haven't been able to go live at 10 a.m. as I've been trying to, as it's been a new thing that I've kind of changed up. Really want to do that. But if there isn't any super chats, we will move on here. Yeah. We can move on. Cool. Looks like talking about Washington, Wisconsin really took out the concurrent viewership, but that's expected. College football playoff predictions. Here are my college football playoff predictions entering Week 11 of the 2025 season. So remember, 5 highest ranked conference champions, they get automatic berths. They no longer get the first round buys. That goes to the 4 highest ranked teams, and the bracket is seeded purely by ranking, unlike last year where the 4 highest ranked conference champs got the buys and then the rest of the bracket was seeded accordingly. So let's check this out here. So the bracket. Now let's get to the teams participating in the bracket. So I have in the first round Memphis playing Oregon, Ole Miss playing Vanderbilt, Duke playing Texas A&M, and Texas playing Texas Tech. This is probably, if I'm being honest, outside of that 5-12 seed matchup, which a 12-1 Memphis might be able to be ranked ahead of 10-3 Duke, but I don't exactly know about that. 12-1 Memphis is the American champion. 10-3 Duke is the ACC champion, and 12-1 Texas Tech is the Big 12 champion. 9-3 Texas gets in because there's only 3 Big 10 teams in this playoff. I actually had another playoff bracket that I made in a what-if scenario about Iowa beating Oregon, and then I think if Iowa beats Oregon, they win out. So what happens if you have a 10-2 Iowa? And Iowa would actually take Texas's spot. It would be the same thing if Michigan beats Ohio State. Then you will not get a 9-3 SEC team in if the Big 10 gets in 4. There is actually a really strange path, very strange one, where the Big 10 will get 5. But that is so unlikely that I don't even want to talk about that. That would require Oregon losing to Iowa, but then winning out, and then Iowa wins out, and Michigan wins out, and you get the picture, because Indiana and Ohio State are already automatic locks for the playoff, if not for the first round bye. Which, speaking of which, here are the teams that earn a first round bye. We got Big 10 champion Indiana in the Rose Bowl. We have SEC champion Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. We have Big 10 runner-up Ohio State in the Orange Bowl, and SEC runner-up Alabama in the Cotton Bowl. Those are the first round buys. As for who would win the first round games, Oregon, I think obviously over Memphis. Vanderbilt, Ole Miss would be super intriguing. Hate Ole Miss's lines of scrimmage, especially on defense. Love Vandy's. So I'd probably pick Vanderbilt given it's a home game, but that'd be very tight. The spread on that would be tight. It'd be a competitive game. That'd be a full 4-quarter battle for the honor of playing in the Rose Bowl against Indiana. Obviously, Oregon moving on to play Alabama in the Cotton Bowl. Duke A&M would be closer than I think people would think. Duke's defense is not phenomenal, but their offense is, and they're very gutsy, and A&M's defense is, it's a good defense, but it's suspect for sure. So I think that Mike Elko coaching against his old school, Duke. Manny Diaz going on the road and playing against a tough Texas A&M team in that tough environment. A&M could win in a blowout, but Duke could also compete and maybe even emerge with a win with the quarterback and offensive play they have, and the fact they do have some capable players on defense. And then this is one that I'd be the most excited for. Texas at Texas Tech. Talk about two of the best defensive fronts in football going against offensive lines that at times have shown promise for Texas, and for Texas Tech is this mean unit that is really good at running the football. And then Arch Manning is a rising quarterback. Brycen Moore's been good since the beginning of the year, but a little bit dinged up. Curious to see if blue chip ratio for Texas, the traditional power in that state, or the new blood who panned on all of their portal additions and has just been destroying the Big 12, who wins there? That'd be an interesting case study in whether or not efficiency metrics are in some ways totally tainted by differences in strength of schedule or not. It'd be interesting. But moving on, because I've already told you who I think is going to win outside of Ole Miss Vandy, and I would go with Vanderbilt there. Or would I? I actually forget who I picked in this bracket. If I'm being honest, I forget. I think I picked... Yes, I did pick Vandy. Had to look over on my sheet here. I was writing all of this down to organize it. But I did pick Vanderbilt. So let's start off with the 1 seed. Indiana playing Vanderbilt in the Rose Bowl. I think Indiana would win pretty decisively there, but Vanderbilt could make things interesting with their style of play. I think no matter what, Indiana would win. For Georgia, Texas Tech, this would be tough for Georgia because lines of scrimmage is how they dominate and how they beat you, and Tech is the cream of the crop there. Not that they're number one, but they're in that category, especially D-line wise, and their defense overall is good enough to probably cause issues for Georgia's offense. On top of, Coy Eakin, Brycen Moore, they could make life hell for that Georgia secondary that has just struggled all season long. If they can beat Texas, they can beat Georgia. Ohio State playing Texas A&M, that would be fascinating for sure. Talk about A&M, physical, run the football team. Talk about Ohio State, physical team that has had some issues running the ball but can do everything else at an elite level. I would strongly lean Ohio State here. I'd strongly lean the Buckeyes, but maybe I'm underestimating A&M. And as for the Cotton Bowl, probably the most competitive of these matchups, Alabama playing Oregon. This is tough, so I'm just going to go with the history between Kalen DeBoer and Dan Lanning and pick Alabama. Looking at the semifinals here, this was tough, but Indiana and Alabama in the Fiesta Bowl, and then Ohio State, Georgia in the Peach Bowl. I think so many of these teams are within a razor's edge margin, and I think that'll only continue to be the case as we go on throughout the year because Ohio State and Indiana are really good right now, but Texas and Oregon, I think, have untapped potential that they could bring out. Same thing with Georgia, and also, how did I forget to include Alabama in that first group? They've figured things out already. A&M could figure things out as the year goes on. So what came down to me making these picks here has a lot to do with who gets to rest first. So Indiana against Vanderbilt, I think Indiana would be possibly playing their backups in the fourth quarter. Alabama would be in a 4-quarter war with Oregon. Georgia, I think, would be in a 4-quarter war with Texas Tech from the physicality standpoint if Tech doesn't sustain any more injuries. And for Ohio State A&M, that wouldn't be as decisive of a win for Ohio State as Indiana over Vandy, but I think Ohio State would be able to pull away and turn it down a little bit in the fourth quarter. I think that would be a 3-quarter game where early fourth quarter, late third quarter, the Buckeyes would begin to pull away. I just trust their offense and defense. I trust A&M's offense, but not their defense nearly as much as Ohio State's. So Ohio State and Indiana get just more opportunities to rest. They're not as physically beaten down. So I have them advancing to the national championship game. I picked Indiana to beat Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game because I think that Indiana is this team that is going to be very hard to beat this year when it's your first time playing them because they're so well coached and dedicated, and also they're pretty deep. They're not as deep as Ohio State, but because of the schedule they faced and how they've taken care of their players who've been hurt and how they haven't sustained a lot of injuries yet, I think that they are in a wonderful position right now. So playing Ohio State the first time, they get a bye, then they play Purdue. They should be resting their starters by the fourth quarter then. I imagine Ohio State-Michigan will be a four-quarter war and a very emotional game for Ohio State, whether they win or lose. So probably an emotional letdown spot after that Michigan game, and Indiana's going to be more rested. And look, if you think that there's a coaching staff better than Indiana right now, you're lying to yourself with what they've done with the roster they have and how they've won their games. So that's enough that goes Indiana's way to where I think they'd win. But Ohio State is also well coached. They also have an elite staff, and they're more talented and they're deeper, at least from what I can tell now. Maybe we play the rest of the year and Indiana is just defies the rules of football as we previously knew them, and no one can stop them. And the only team that could was Iowa or Oregon earlier in the year. But I'm not there yet. So I think in a rematch, it would be Ohio State's. And as of right now, that means I'm picking the Buckeyes to go back-to-back, this time 15-1 instead of 14-2, and winning the national championship. And what a job that would be from Ryan Day. Losing all of that talent, both your coordinators, and you reload, and you win it all again with a chance to possibly even three-peat the following year. It also would be impressive for Indiana. I think that, these two staffs and teams, Indiana and Ohio State, have done a very impressive job. Very impressive. Because of either how, much Ohio State lost coaching staff and roster-wise, but they just reloaded, and then how Indiana lost a decent amount, not the same amount, but close in terms of production, and they're not as talented as Ohio State. They don't recruit at that level, and yet they got better. They didn't just reload to get close to where they were. They got way better. Way better. And I think the evidence of that is how this Indiana team played Oregon versus how last year's Indiana team played Notre Dame, because I don't think this Oregon team is anywhere close to last year's Ohio State team. I don't think any of these teams are 2024 Ohio State level. But the same team that won it all last year, the same team that was the 2024 Buckeyes, is also going to win it all this year, at least based on how I see it right now. Last week it was Indiana who I had winning it all, so things can quickly change, and I wouldn't be shocked if next week I flip back to Indiana. Wouldn't be shocked at all. It's really close. I think as of right now it's going to come down to between those two teams. I just want to see more before I fully settle in and fully buy in on one of them. All right, now we can talk about an early preview of the game. You made Paul Feinbaum's head spin off, Sam. No, I don't buy the SEC anymore. In terms of the top teams, with the exception of Alabama. But I want to see how Alabama handles November too, because there's a chance that tough strength of schedule could solidify them and make them stronger than everyone else. There's also a chance that it could possibly wear them down. So we'll see. But they're older than a lot of these teams we're talking about in the playoff, and that can help too. And they're among the deepest. I mean, they can match Ohio State, I think, pound for pound in depth. Same thing with Georgia, at least on paper, with how they've all those three have recruited. Let me give you an early preview of the game for about 10 minutes. Then we'll talk about Indiana and then some other things as well. Let me know your thoughts down below, what you think about this game too. We're more than a month away, but I want to give some pointers and talking points and open up the discussion about Ohio State versus Michigan. So this is going to be an early look ahead for the game, and let me know what you think about this. I love to hear your thoughts. Michigan's won 4 straight. They're currently ranked 21st. Ohio State's ranked first. Michigan's either top 20 or top 15 in power ratings. Ohio State is either number 1 or number 2. Games at Michigan. Michigan has the streak, but Ohio State's the better team. And it's interesting. A lot of what I'm reading up about these teams and how their fans view them and how the college football public views them in this game will make this matchup one of the more intriguing ones in football, as it always is. Wasn't supposed to be that way last year, but it turned out to be. Close game. Was that way in 2023. They weren't close by the final scoreboard in 21 or 22, and it wasn't all that close in 2021, but they were highly anticipated matchups. Now, here we are. Is it November? Yes, November 4th. It's November 4th. And what I see in this game is a huge beam of confidence from the Ohio State side. Of course, there are some people saying that they're nervous about this game, and some are. There are also some saying they're nervous about this game as more of a cross your fingers or as more of a charm, like to not jinx the team. They're actually thinking that Ohio State will win big here, but they don't want to jinx it. You know, that stuff isn't real. It isn't. But there's a beam of confidence from the Ohio State side in not just the game, but in this season. Ohio State's the favorite to win it all, as they should be. They're the number 1 team in America. They are 8-0. They're 5-0. They have beaten Texas, Washington, Illinois, beat Penn State. No, Penn State's a dumpster fire, but still beat them. They're kind of on their revenge tour, in a way. You know, Jim Knowles, Washington, Texas. This team, whether or not they actually are or aren't, feels doubted, and the fan base does too. This is in large part a kind of revenge tour, which is, you know, kind of in one way funny and another way very understandable. They didn't go 12-0 last season. You'd like to do that. They didn't beat Michigan last year. You'd like to do that. And they've looked way better than Michigan, honestly. They have the better passing offense. They have the better passing defense. They, I think, have the better rushing defense. Not quite as confident on that one, but would lean there. Michigan's special teams doesn't have the same advantage they did last year. Now, Michigan is the better rushing offense, but Ohio State overall, I would take them clearly at quarterback, receiver, probably tight end, though Michigan's impressed with its depth. I would take Ohio State definitely at corner, safety. I would take their starting 2 linebackers. With Michigan's linebackers fully healthy, I'd take their depth. D-line, I'd probably take Ohio State too, but I also don't know. When you have the linebackers and safeties they do, that can really help the defensive front. We saw this a bit last year with Ohio State too, where eventually their D-line got around that corner, but not really until the playoffs did they totally explode in the brightest moments, and Caleb Downs and Styles and Simon did a lot within that system. But I would take Ohio State at like 90% of the positions, honestly, and some positions on the offensive line too. Punter and kicker probably would pick Michigan, but it's not by the degree that it was last year. The beam of confidence is understandable. If you're a Michigan guy, it's quite terrifying. If you're an Ohio State guy, it's quite exhilarating, but maybe also terrifying a bit, because that beam of confidence for this game was also at the exact same level last year, and look what happened. And if you're Michigan, you don't have a beam of confidence, but one thing you have going for you is at least you are closer to Ohio State this year than last year. This year's Ohio State team, and I know I will catch flack for this, they are not the 2024 Buckeyes. You can pretend they are, maybe I'm totally off base, but I think the odds of that are very unlikely. Very unlikely. I think that Oregon, Penn State, and maybe even Indiana last year were all better than any team Ohio State's played so far this year. And while Ohio State has upgraded at some positions, certainly, they also have, how do I put this? They've regressed in the ground game. They've actually regressed in special teams efficiency. And as for the defense, I mean, analytically, it's better than it was last year. But Oregon, Indiana, and Penn State all had offenses last year that are better than the best offense that Ohio State's played this year. So I don't know. And that defense, I mean, remember, they pulverized Oregon in the Rose Bowl. They pulverized Texas. Outside of a late, like, kind of fluky fourth quarter comeback, they pulverized Notre Dame's offense. And I mean, and they also pulverized Indiana as they pulverized Penn State. That was 5, like, really talented offenses that they pulverized. What really talented offense this year have they pulverized? And don't say Washington. Don't say Washington. And I'm saying this as someone who has Ohio State as the number 1 team. Don't say Washington, because Michigan held Washington to 7. And we know, I know, you know, Buckeye fan or Michigan fan, that Michigan's defense is not all that special. It is a good, maybe if coached correctly, great unit. It is not special. Washington's offense sucks at scaling with teams that have great defensive fronts, of which Michigan has, and Ohio State's is also that and probably better. They cannot, for the life of them, scale. Unless they somehow beat Oregon in an offensive fight, I am not going to deviate away from that. I've seen 2 games where they cannot, for the life of them, scale their offense and replicate its success against better defensive fronts. So if you're Michigan, you don't have a lot of confidence, and you shouldn't. I mean, that Purdue game was bad. But also for Michigan, you have to accept the reality check that after last year and who you lost and where this team is, that you were never going to win it all this year. Your best chance was losing 2 of USC, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Michigan State or Washington, whichever one you want to make the 4th out of that series. Your best case scenario was you beat 3, but more likely than not 2. You lose at least 1, definitely 2, especially since that's happened. And then you beat Ohio State in a close game. You reach the playoffs, you get killed in the playoffs, and then you build on next year. That would be a successful season for Michigan. They're in that position. Michigan's not confident at all, and I don't think they should be, based on their performances and the fact that, look, Ohio State's the better team. That's something I established pretty early on. But what you can hang your hat on is that you are better offensively than you were last year. You're not necessarily better than you were defensively either, but your secondary was not special last year. Your linebackers weren't either. And due to Ryan Day just being kind of an idiot, you were able to hold him to 10 points. Your offense, and specifically rushing offense, is much better than it was last year, even with Justice Haynes out. You have the QB run. Your running back Jordan Marshall's a lot like Khalil Mullings. Your offensive line is better. Your receivers are much better at blocking and better overall, even though they're still, pretty porous. You at least have the fact that you're at home and that this line will probably be 7.5 in favor of Ohio State at the best. It will not be 20.5. It won't be double digits like it was last year. Maybe it gets bet up to that, but I also don't know if that's going to be the case either. Because Michigan here has some cards that they could potentially pull to make this thing interesting. Some of my early thoughts on matchups and how this game goes is the mental game. So who has the mental edge for 60 minutes is going to be critical. Michigan has had this for the past 4 years. And, people talk about, Ryan Day playing with house money. And I get that. And cliches are annoying and sometimes can be pretty stupid, but they also can have a sliver of truth. However, one thing I will fight back on that with is, in what game has Ohio State's defense been tested? In what game have they been down and the momentum is against them enough to where it feels like their opponent is live and might even be favored to win. Alabama has faced that. Indiana has faced that. Michigan knows it because Michigan's got pulverized by USC and they lost to Oklahoma. But Ohio State, they have not faced that. And sometimes what can happen is if you're a team who is undefeated and you're humming along and you've been able to out-talent everyone, coach circles around everyone, you're able to beat up on everyone, and then one day you run into a brick wall and it's just hard to get up because it hurts and it's so painful that you flinch. Michigan has a chance to do that here. And that is mostly because of their rushing attack. If Ohio State had a rushing attack that I respected as one that could win them a title by its own, I would not even be making this video. I just tell you, Ohio State's winning. They're going to win by a big margin. But they don't have that. They've tried over and over again to get it going, and the best they have are a few long runs, typically later in the game, against inferior competition or defenses that are atrocious at stopping the run. Michigan not being one of those. So that segues into the lines of scrimmage. Whoever gets more TFLs, sacks, who stuffs the run, that's going to be huge here. The passing attack, obviously Ohio State's better there. But what I mean by the passing attack being a chess piece here is who puts it to better use. Because say Ohio State decides to do, not what they did last year, but they decide they want to, they really want to like blow out Michigan. They don't just want to beat them, but they want to send a message, which has kind of been the theme with Ohio State every year since 2021. We don't just want to beat these guys, we want to pulverize them. And it pigeonholes their game plan. So similar to last year, but not as bad, not entirely. And it's either they're in obvious passing situations or they're, running the same concept. And what if Michigan uses their passing attack more methodically? I'm not a coaching expert, a play calling expert, don't pretend to be. So I'm not going to go in the weeds there. I can't, I'm incapable of. But you all can probably get what I'm saying. If Michigan's maybe more creative there, if Michigan keeps mixing it up, and maybe Ohio State's like run on every first down, sometimes second down, we're always passing on long downs. That type of thing. Coverage and tackling. You got to clean up things if you're the secondary. You have to tackle, and you have to cover well. Bless me. Especially the case with Michigan, going up against these receivers. Especially the case with them. But also I want to emphasize it with Ohio State too. Not to the same degree, their secondary is better. They have not... It depends on what version of Bryce Underwood shows up. Outside of the Washington game, of which Michigan's offensive line and pass protection is way better than Washington's, and their defense is better. Outside of that game, Ohio State, if the Bryce Underwood of 50% of the year, 75% of the year shows up, this will be the second toughest passing attack they've played, which is hilarious given they played Texas and Arch Manning and Penn State, and I know they didn't play Drew Aller, but they were supposed to preseason. I never thought I'd be saying that. It's not because Michigan's pass offense is good. It's because Manning sucked initially. Now he's getting things together. And Ethan Grunkmeyer and those receivers just... That passing offense is not what I thought it was preseason. And then last but not least is the balanced offense. This kind of circles back to who utilizes the passing attack better. But who's more creative, who executes better, who wins the little things. If we're talking about who wins the big things, it's going to be Ohio State, because Ohio State's better and their capacity to be explosive on offense and defense is greater than Michigan's. But what about the little things? Who does the little things better? And that is going to be a big piece in this game. Ohio State should win. I've been on record saying Ohio State will win, despite picking Michigan preseason. However, big however, I also thought that Ohio State preseason would be significantly better than Michigan. Same thing exists here. Ohio State's done a better job in a lot of different areas than I thought they would preseason. Michigan has been about the same. They're better at linebacker than I thought, worse on D-line, better on O-line, a little bit worse at quarterback, and worse at special teams. What's interesting to me is the confidence factor in the Buckeyes here. No one, and I mean no one, is going to pick Michigan to win this thing. Unless Ohio State loses to someone in the next 3 games and Michigan beats Maryland and Northwestern by an average of 50 points. It's not going to happen. So with Ohio State, you're not going to get the benefit of people doubting you here. Maybe you can generate that in the locker room, but Michigan will probably be able to match that with everyone picking against them here. This is going to require Ohio State playing their A game and having the humility and mental fortitude combined to go through 4 quarters and come out with a win. Based on who Ohio State is, they are not 2019 Ohio State. And Michigan is, if they won last year, they can find a way to win this year. They're better than they were last year. The point I'm trying to make is Ohio State can't play arrogantly and win. I swear, and I'm a Michigan guy, but I swear if Day comes out and decides to be like we're gonna hang 100 on you, which has been the mentality of most games against Michigan, especially in Ohio Stadium. If he does that, I do not want to hear. I do not want to hear anything anything about Michigan. Don't want to. I just don't. And the reason I say that is, last year was supposed to be the reckoning. The year before was supposed to be the reckoning. And I know that Ohio State's playing with house money, but there's also the reality that with the way that Ohio State's treated this game and the way that I think a lot of Ohio State brass, boosters, and people view this game, that a lot of people think that the natural order of things is Michigan being Ohio State's body pillow. And we're seeing that slowly begin to creep back in as Ohio State looks phenomenal and as Michigan, beats Purdue by 5 points. This game is going to determine who goes to Indy. Ohio State's schedule gets, from a Big Ten conference standpoint, just kind of gets weaker and weaker. Michigan has at least played not just Washington, but USC, Nebraska. Northwestern's won some games. Maryland might, trip up and find a win here or there. And Oregon's schedule is, from a Big Ten combined win percentage standpoint, is tougher than both these. So if Michigan wins here, they're probably going to Indy, or they don't, but Oregon goes, and Ohio State sits at home. If Ohio State wins, well, they obviously go to Indy. They'll be 12-0, and they will be guaranteed a first-round bye. If they lose to Michigan, I actually think there's a chance they'll be guaranteed a first-round bye too. Just going from number 1 to number 5, I think is it's a pretty drastic change. And if Ohio State loses this game, they will still have a much better chance of winning it all than Michigan. I will still rank them ahead of Michigan, rate them ahead of Michigan by quite a significant margin. Again, I think Ohio State probably should win, but be careful out there. Very early read on this is that Ohio State should win, but there's almost too much juice going Ohio State's way. A lot is being made up about this team being better than last year's team. It could be. I don't think it is. A lot is being made up about how Michigan didn't even improve at all from last year. And they're at home. Ohio State's on the road. A lot's being made up of how, I've heard this, you've heard this if you follow Twitter, that Ohio State's the next dynasty. And that type of stuff, given the recent history of this game, can be detrimental. Like, if I were Ohio State, I'd calm down about some of that stuff. And if I were Michigan, I'd be hoping that that continues. For purely the football stuff, which is hard to account for because this rivalry is that intense. Like, Michigan in 18, from the metrics entering that game, should have won and covered, but they got destroyed. From the football side of things, Ohio State should win. It should be their game. But the one edge Michigan has on the football side of things will be the ground game. If Ohio State makes this about their ground game, if they do, if they make it that, Michigan will win. If this is a game about running the ball and stopping the run combined, Michigan will win. Ohio State does not have the backs. I know Michigan, Haynes is out, but Marshall's much better at seeking contact and pulling players away. And Michigan's run blocking O-line is better. Pass blocking, it's not better than Ohio State's. If Ohio State makes this a game about the air, they should win, and perhaps by a comfortable margin. But again, I also don't know. Like, what's the weather going to be like? What is Michigan's pass rush like? I mean, Michigan, there's a good chance they put on the best pass rush performance of anyone Ohio State's played all season long. What version of Underwood shows up? If it's the version that we saw against like Washington, for example, then Michigan's offense, based on some things that I've seen, should be able to score enough points to push this defense a bit. It should be Ohio State's game. I'm going to mention that over and over again, but it's an early read. I still think there's a pretty good chance that Michigan pulls it off here. Those are my thoughts on the game as of November 4th. All right, this is going to be an interesting one. I tried to make the stream shorter, and it's going to be a stream until probably 9. Oh, Mission Forward. Thank you for the $3 super chat. Really appreciate it. Let me highlight it in the community section. Let me highlight it. I'm also going to... Yeah, I am starving. Starving. Yeah, let me highlight this super chat. Thank you for the $3. I appreciate that. $3 super chat with that doggy emoji. Why are you making predictions of teams when the committee has released the actual teams? Because we don't know who's going to win out. So I'm predicting who's going to win out and then who will win it all. The committee is just bracketing based on what they know right now. Speaking of which, I actually have a graphic ready for my college football playoff reaction. So I can quickly look at that graphic. Thank you again, Mission Forward 3, for that super chat. Let me look at the graphic. Bless me. Okay, CFP rankings reaction. So they did rank Ohio State 1. I did see that. Let me see what else they ranked. Everything's loading. Everything's loading. After this, I'm going to make a quick call, and then we'll finish out with this segment. Yep, Ohio State's 1, Indiana's 2, A&M is 3, Alabama 4, Georgia 5, Ole Miss 6, BYU 7, Tech is 8, Oregon is 9, Notre Dame is 10, Texas is 11, and they're ahead of number 12, Oklahoma. Utah's 13th, Virginia 14th. Iowa's ranked 20th, so Oregon-Iowa will be a top 20 matchup. Louisville's 15th. Tech is 17th. Vanderbilt 16th. I'll react to all of this in a video probably within the next hour. crazy stuff. The fact they've ranked BYU 7th does mean BYU can BYU can't get in at 10-2, but I don't think they value strength of schedule as much as they're advertising, as much as they've said they do. Like if you truly value that, for example, you put Texas and Oklahoma ahead of Notre Dame, and they have not done that. You put Indiana ahead of Ohio State. They haven't done that. You probably put BYU and Texas Tech like in the high teens, and if one of them wins out or only suffers one loss, then good, you've earned your way in, for example. Based on the current bracket here, we'll talk about this later, but Indiana, Ohio State, A&M, and Alabama receive the first byes, and Virginia is in the college football playoff as the ACC champion. So, yeah. All right, everyone. You know what? We've been live long enough. I don't want to go any longer than I have to, so we're gonna cut it short right here. I need to eat, so we'll go and eat. I'll probably get Chinese food and then release all these clips. Prepare for tomorrow's show, which will feature any things we didn't get to today, and I'll see you all then. So thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and come on tomorrow's show to learn why college football loathes Indiana, or why they will if they haven't already. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you